All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Rob Shums. I'm the owner of Reason Prep. I make all the videos, all the resources, all the courses. And today we're going to have a live stream to go over any questions that you have on the SAT, the ACT, SAT subject tests, primarily Math 1, Math 2, Chemistry, Literature, APs, college admissions, any general questions you might have. Feel free to send them, and if I don't know the answer, I'll just say so. But if I do know an answer, I'll try to give my best possible response. The way to send questions is either email ask@reasonprep.com, and you can see below the video of me, is my email address, ask@reasonprep.com. You can send an email there, or you can post the question in chat. You might want to send an email if it's a question that you want to send a picture with, an image with, or, for whatever reason, if you want to send a picture of the question. If you do ask a specific question from like an SAT or an ACT test, please do include the answer. It just streamlines the process, so I don't have to go looking for an answer to a question. I can just answer it. So let's see if I have any questions to start. Okay, so still waiting for some questions. Like I said, you can email ask@reasonprep.com, or you can post them in chat. While we're waiting, I'm just going to check my phone, because why not? Really exciting viewing, I know. But them's the breaks. All right. So, like I said, any questions on SAT, ACT, SAT subject tests in Math 1, Math 2, Chemistry, Literature? Those are the main areas I usually answer questions about. But anything on college admissions, APs, school stuff, anything you want to ask, if I don't know the answer, I'll say so. If I do, I'll try to give an answer and or point you to further resources that might help. And I realize this time on 4th of July weekend is probably not going to be insanely popular, but oh well. As well, because I guess on the West Coast it would be 8 a.m. No one, I think, is looking to get up on a Sunday at 8 a.m. for SAT, ACT prep, but figure it out. Part of trying to figure out over the summer is what times will be best, what times will be best to actually have this. Try to vary it up. I try to have at least one per week. Try to do some in the evening during a weekday. I'm try to do some during like the afternoon on a weekday. It's a little bit harder given my tutoring schedule, but I'll see if I can fit an hour in somewhere. I'm guessing morning-ish times on the weekend are not going to be super popular. What a surprise. That's okay. So probably what I'll end up doing is just waiting until 11:15. If questions start coming in by then, that's cool. I'll answer them. If not, I'll just cut it short. No reason for me to sit here looking at my phone, twiddling my thumbs without any questions. So that's fine. We'll be setting up another session sometime next week, probably. I'll have to check my schedule again. My tutoring schedule is getting very packed at this point, so it leaves me less time to do these during the week, especially with this Tuesday being the 4th of July. But What did I do there? So yeah, again, if you want to post questions or ask questions, feel free to email me, ask@recentprep.com. Otherwise, you can post them in chat. That's fine too. And like I said, another 7 minutes. If I get more questions, I'll answer them. If not, I'm going to leave because I've got lots of other stuff to do anyway. So that works out. Future sessions, if you want to check out future live streams, if for whatever reason you missed this one or you wanted to attend another one or you don't have questions yet, but you might in the future, there's a few ways to see where to get my live streams. I'm going to put them on the screen. Just give me a second to get my text up. So, future live streams. Join my Facebook group. Join my mailing list. Check out reasonprep.com. Look for the live stream page. And was there another one? Oh, subscribe to me on YouTube. So that will keep one of those ways you'll know when I'm going to be having a live stream. I usually post it a few days at least in advance. Okay, so we got a question. If someone's scoring around 750s for math and aiming for an 800, would you just recommend Khan Academy? Yeah, that plus official tests for sure. But yeah, at this point, if you're getting a 750, you're missing, I don't know, 5 questions probably, thereabouts. So, and they're probably the hard questions. So definitely Khan Academy would be a resource you want to use. Real tests, as always. I mean, that goes without saying. But yeah, you're at the point where it's about kind of targeting specific topics that maybe are giving you trouble, or it might just be focusing on hard questions. So let me get out my hard question info here. So when you're practicing, you want to focus, if you're in this situation, focus especially on these questions in real tests, and then also on Khan Academy, hard problems. So these are the questions that are typically going to be harder for each of the math sections, and likely to be the ones you're missing if you're in the 750s. Not always. I mean, there might be some easier questions that you're missing due to silly mistakes, avoidable mistakes, but this would be so certainly something to focus on, in addition to trying to find if there's any topics that are giving you trouble, any concepts or formulas or whatever that you don't know that you need to know. That should be revealed as well as you're doing practice tests, Khan Academy, things like that. Oh, you're very welcome. Okay, got some more questions rolling in, so let's go. Hello, I am really stuck on the writing section. I always get 8 mistakes that are mostly focused on vocab and context. How can I improve? Memorizing vocabulary isn't really helpful. Thank you. So I assume, if you mean vocab and context, I assume you mean reading. Though there are some questions also on the writing. I mean, I won't cross this out because there are also some questions on the writing that are vocab focused. They're more like, yeah, I guess they're kind of like vocab and context. They're diction or word choice. So I'll just add reading here so that, we'll cover both because it's the same issue. And so it sounds like you're getting a lot of the questions wrong that are vocabulary based. And yeah, I kind of agree. In most cases, memorizing vocabulary isn't helpful for a lot of reasons, which I won't go into. So what do you do? And unfortunately, this is where it gets rough. What do you do, right? If you don't know the words, what do you do? Well, in terms of the reading vocab and context, there are a few strategies you can use to help narrow down your choices. So just to briefly go through those strategies. First one is, change this to blue. First one is to plug in your own word to the sentence and compare to the choices. So you're going to pick a word based on the context of the sentence, see what makes sense based on what the sentence is trying to say, look for context clues, and then compare your word to the choices. Second thing is check if the choices are even synonyms of the original word. So if there's a word in the choice that like never ever means the same thing as the word in the question, it's very unlikely to be correct. And then finally, plug in the choices into the sentence. If it sounds weird, not likely to be correct. So here, if you plug in a word from the choice and it sounds off, just doesn't sound like something you've heard before, there's probably a reason for it. It's probably because it's wrong. It's not used in that way. So you can use that again, not maybe to eliminate a choice completely, but at least to, weaken it. If you're stuck between two, you go with the other one. So those are 3 strategies, but in the end, if you don't know the words, strategies can only take you so far. So what you're talking about here is bumping up against a very real limit, a very real wall. And certainly you can try to memorize vocab, but that certainly has its limitations. In most cases, like if you're getting these 8 questions wrong, they're mostly vocab and context. I mean, I can't diagnose exactly your situation because I'm only going off of what you say. First, you just want to clean up any mistakes that aren't vocab and context. So maybe you're making other mistakes that are much more fixable. Address those first. Then if you're stuck with like a core set of questions that are vocab based and you're using the strategies, you tried studying vocab and it didn't work, you're kind of stuck. That's kind of it. There's not really much more you can do. I mean, it's like saying, how can I learn how to read a French novel? Well, at the end of the day, I have to learn French words. It's the same thing in, an English passage, whether you're a native speaker or not. How do I learn to read this passage with these hard words I don't know? You have to learn what the hard words you don't know mean. There's really no shortcut in that sense. So learn the strategies, improve the best you can elsewhere to maximize your score, and then do your best to eliminate on these questions, get down to an answer. Don't dwell on them, though, because everyone's going to reach their natural limit, or at least not their natural limit, but their limit of the vocab they know and don't know. And yeah, that's just kind of the reality at times. A follow-up question, which is actually related to this. I'll just pick up to this now. For SAT or ACT reading, should you know straight vocabulary, or is that not completely necessary? For ACT, very much less necessary. Obviously, whenever you're reading any text, there's going to be vocabulary in it. But generally speaking, the reading level of ACT passages isn't that high, so you can usually get away without, of course, doing any kind of vocab studying for ACT reading. For the SAT, they have removed a lot of the older tests' focus on hard vocab words, but there is still some, both in vocab and context, in some of the passages, and in, of course, the history, old school language passages. So for SAT, just like I said, I don't think in most cases, I would say 98% 98% of cases, that's an approximate number, 98% of cases, it's not necessary to study vocab by flashcards. But there are some edge cases where maybe that's useful, such as the person I was just talking about. It could be more useful for them, maybe not super useful, but more useful for them than most students to actually study just straight up vocabulary. So for ACT reading, no. For SAT reading, probably not. For most people, you should be focusing on other stuff that is more likely for you to improve on in a short period of time, right? Because vocab is something that you build up over your entire life. I mean, literally, you start acquiring vocabulary. I mean, it depends on what you call acquiring, but, anywhere from, let's just say around 1 year old, you start acquiring the meaning of words. And, by 2, you're speaking those words. And by 3, you're speaking sentences and things like that, right? So you are acquiring vocabulary more or less from the minute you're born. And so there's no quick intervention in a month that's going to change that ship without a really insane work ethic approach to it. But in most cases, I would say if you have that insane program to learn vocab, it's probably more useful to use that on, say, learning reading strategies or writing grammar rules or math concepts, right? It's better, that energy is better applied elsewhere. So I would say in most cases, no, it's not really necessary. Focus on other things first. $790 for math, but $600 in reading. I want to push my screening score to 700. So first, I'm using Meltzer, but anything else. So part of the reading is the writing score. Don't forget the writing. So make sure you are maximizing your writing score. So that would be your grammar rules, etc. For that, I recommend my writing course. It's free, available on YouTube. Maybe you're already using it. This is really all you need for writing. Free, you can learn everything you need to know for the SAT writing section. I go through all the rules, strategies, and 8 full practice tests, question by question. This is all you need for writing, and you should be able to get a perfect score on it. Not everybody will, but you will be capable of it based on the videos and other things I go through. For reading, sure, the Meltzer book is fine. Real SATs are the key here. And this is, and I go through this in a different video where I talk about what to do when you run out of SATs. The problem is we only have 8 full SATs and 2 practice PSATs. So we just don't have a lot of practice material. But you can definitely use the new SATs, of course, and then if you run out of those, use old SAT reading. You want to, I've said that's a lot, but it bears repeating, you want to avoid as much as possible third-party passages. So Barron's, Kaplan, Princeton Review, even Khan Academy. They're just not, and it's no slight against them, it's just hard to make good reading questions. It's just not at the quality, at the precision that real stuff will be. I also have a reading course, which maybe, just like I have a writing course, this one's not free. But I go through a number of strategies. I go through 8 full tests, question by question. That might be something that appeals to you as well. But beyond that, Meltzer book is good. I've always found it somewhat difficult, though. If you're having problems with reading, doing more reading to learn how to read seems to be kind of weird. So I think the best thing to do in the short term is do practice sections, practice tests, really spend time with them, review your answers, review the questions, review the passages, really squeeze every drop of value out of those practice tests and practice sections. Couple that with like a book like Meltzer's book, which I believe discusses the questions, my courses, which discusses the questions and other strategies, tutors, classes, work with classmates or friends as well to get your feedback on each other. All that stuff is really important, but I don't think there's any, one book or one resource that's going to solve all the problems. Reading is the hardest to improve, so it does take an effort from many different directions to improve it. Okay, so I'm following up on another question. It's going to be probably about the two-part reading questions. So once I get a clarification on that, we will go about that. But if you're watching and you want to send the question, there are two ways to do it. One is through the chat. That's the quickest way. Or you can send an email to ask@reasonprep.com. Especially useful if you have to send an image or follow-up information or whatever. Okay, do you have any advice on how to tackle command of evidence? So this, I followed up, confirmed. This means the kind of two-part reading questions. And, a lot of the details of how to approach these depend on the question that you're looking at, the passage. But I can give you my approach, and you can think about how you approach it, how it compares, and I'll try to explain why I do it the way I do it. What I don't recommend, which is what a lot of people do, let me actually get a sample one of these out here so we can just look at it. So let's get just a part 2 question here. Okay, this one's fine. So we're not going to actually do the question. I'm just using this to illustrate. Let's do this. All right, let's make this smaller. All right. So what a lot of students do is they will just read these lines separately and try to read these lines and find the answer for 12. So it's almost like a lot of students will do the second question first to help answer the first question. And I don't recommend that for lots of reasons, mostly because, number one, if you're just reading these lines, focusing on them out of context, you might lose an important meaning to what's going on in those lines if you're just focusing on the lines. Two, they're going to know you're going to try to do this, and they set up traps. So, for example, let's just pretend, I don't remember what the answer was to this one, but let's say the answer to this was B, C. Let's say that was the answer. What they will often have is maybe choice A will link up with D, and maybe choice D will link up with C, or something like that. Like D contains evidence for C, and A contains evidence that seems to point to D. If you're just focusing on the connection between the choices and not what the passage is saying, not trying to answer the question in itself, you might get drawn into traps because you're focusing on which choices link together rather than what's the answer to 12. So what I do is I basically, outside of looking at the range of lines, I know the answer to 12 is going to be between lines 4 to 54. So I will mark my passage with brackets to focus on that section. But then I otherwise just ignore this completely, and I answer this as much as I can on my own. Now, if it gets tricky and I can't find the answer, I can go ahead and peek at these choices, but I don't do that first. I almost never do it. Very rarely will I actually peek at the choice before very rarely will I actually use these choices to answer this. I'm going to try to answer this like I have to answer every reading question by trying to find the part of the passage that points to the choices. Just because it has a part 2 makes it no different. In fact, the part 2 can become really easy if in the process of answering 12, I say, oh yeah, I see evidence for this in 21 to 24 or something. And then boom, you have the answer to part 2 instantaneously. So you just treat this question as its own thing. You can use this brackets method, as I call it, to know the answers between those lines, but otherwise answer it straightforwardly. Don't rely on the crutch of using these choices. It's going to get you into trouble. It's a bad habit. And you're going to have other questions where you're not going to have these lines. So you might as well get used to finding the answer in the passage directly anyway. So that's my approach. Again, a lot of it depends on specific questions, specific details. But yeah, that's the basic idea. So, question about a specific book which I haven't used. I found doing rates or in the College Panda book through conversion factors quite challenging to address them in any of your videos or recommendations. So I don't know what those questions look like in that particular book. It's very likely or possible that the questions are not very realistic to what's tested on the SAT, in which case they are not just useless, they're harmful because it's directing attention to things that they don't test. But maybe they are good questions related to like unit conversions or something. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. So I do address them in my math course videos with unit conversion. To get more specific, though, it might be useful for me to see one of those questions. So if it's possible for you to maybe email me just a picture of the page or the question so I can take a look at it and maybe get a better idea of what the question type you're referring to is. But yeah, there are questions on unit conversion for sure. I do go through that in my videos. Questions on rates are rarer, but I mean, they're kind of related to unit conversion. I do some stuff on that as well, but it really comes down to the details. It's very possible that the book may be asking questions that are way harder or way unrealistic, way more unrealistic than anything you'll see on the test. So if you want to send me, ask@reasonprep.com, an actual example question, I can maybe give more specific feedback. Someone follows up. The College Panda questions are good. They're on the harder end. Yeah, it depends on what that means by harder. So like this is where like a lot of people like to do harder questions because they feel like if I can do harder questions, I'll be able to do the easier stuff on the test. And that's true to a point. You want them to be hard in the style that SAT questions are hard. You don't want them to be hard in the sense of testing things that aren't tested, vague or ambiguous questions, inelegant math, or just sloppy, messy formulations. So being harder is good, maybe. Just depends on the question. Yeah, so you say like numbers 27 to 30 style. If that's the case, that's awesome because you want to get that practice difficulty in. But I've never seen them, so I can't vouch either way. But it sounds pretty reasonable to me. Luckily, I haven't used any of the practice tests yet, so should I start with a pre-test and break down what specific areas need to improve on? Yeah, that's a good place to start. Pick a practice test, do it, see what areas you struggle with, and start keeping a list, keeping a notebook or a spreadsheet or Google Doc or a Word doc or a text file, piece, pencil and paper, and whatever you like. But keep track of, those weak areas, and then continue to practice them. Khan Academy is relatively useful for writing practice. I think it's good when you start out to really get a lot of repetitions with certain grammar rules. Otherwise, it's pretty limited. I mean, yeah, it's pretty good. It's certainly better than the reading. So yeah, I give you my blessing to do Khan Academy writing. I'm not gonna say it's perfect. Obviously, you always want to stick to real SAT tests. And even for writing, I recommend ACT English even if you're doing the SAT, because ACT English and SAT rating are basically the same. So you study for one, it helps you with the other. So that's probably what I would recommend even over Khan Academy, because again, this is no slight against Khan Academy. It's just that test makers spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and thousands of man hours putting together their tests. So they're going to be very high quality and representative of what you'll see on test day. We want to take advantage of that as much as possible. A lot of websites recommend Crack SAT for SAT practice. Do I recommend it? Not really. It doesn't have anything. I think, in fact, College Board finally went after them and made them take down all their official material. So even if that weren't the case, they're still kind of not useful because you can get all the official practice tests on College Board's website, Khan Academy website, etc. So yeah, I don't think it's... And then they do have extra random questions, but all those questions are basically just ripped from Barron's books, Princeton Review books, Kaplan books, and those have the same issues that I've addressed elsewhere, where third-party books, generally you want to avoid them. So I don't really recommend Crack SAT. Crack ACT just has a lot of good old practice tests on it. That's why I recommend it. But otherwise, I don't see much value in using those questions. The source of the questions, where they come from is super unknown and unclear. And again, you just want to use as real material as possible when you're preparing. What is the passage sequence in reading? So SAT and ACT are different. SAT does not have a passage sequence except for literature/fiction always being the first passage on the SAT. But then the rest are mixed up. You'll definitely see a history. You'll definitely see a natural science. You'll definitely see a dual passage. You'll probably see stuff on technology or on like social science, but they're mixed up. On the ACT, it's fixed. So on the ACT, you will always see what's called literary narrative as passage 1, which is either like a fiction or a memoir type thing. Passage 2 will be social science. Passage 3 is humanities. Passage 4 is natural science. So ACT reading is very clearly defined what it's going to be. SAT reading is mixed up, except for the fact that you know the first passage is always literature. And I don't know why they do that. That's kind of weird. Why they always guarantee the first passage to be fiction. There's got to be a reason for it. That doesn't seem like it would be arbitrary. But, yeah. Oh, I butchered that. Okay, I just took the second SAT practice test and got a 1560. Very nice. Missed one question in the reading, got a 710 on the first. I've studied for Meltzer's book for the last 3 weeks or so. I'm more worried about being able to match my performance on the next test I take. Do you have any suggestions to maintain a top-tier reading score? Just continue to practice. You have to keep that muscle going, right? If you take some time off, it's naturally going to decay. So keep up the practice. Note that there's always going to be variance. So if you get 1 wrong this time, but next time you get 5 wrong, and then after that you get 4 wrong, and then one time you get 6 wrong, and then you get none wrong, and then you get 2 wrong, totally normal. So you're never going to be able to get the exact same score every single time. You're going to be within a range. So the goal is to keep that range as high up as possible, to keep that narrow. So really no major suggestions, just keep practicing. Don't give yourself any time off. Doesn't mean you have to practice every single day at this point. If you're in a maintenance mode for your reading, then maybe, every 3 days, every 4 days, something like that. You don't need to do it every day. And then also in general, just keep reading, on those days where you're not doing practice tests or sections. Read other stuff, read fiction, read the newspaper, read magazines, read quality material. I've got a reading list on my website you can check out, but just keep reading on your off day, and then every 3, 4, 5 days, whatever it is, if you're in maintenance mode for reading, to keep the score where it is, just do another practice section, practice test, that kind of deal, to keep that muscle strong, more or less. Okay, so we had a math question. This looks like from, I believe this comes from a real SAT. And so if you haven't done this one from a real SAT, I think this is one of the more recent ones. I forget. You might now want to watch this because I'm going to spoil the question. And there's a follow-up question, which actually, I don't know if this is a typo. This person says, I cannot really understand why it is 4Q. And the thing is, it's not 4Q. It's 4T equals Q, which I'll get into in a second. So maybe that's the issue, unless this is a typo. Maybe you meant, why is it 4T? Or maybe you meant something else. But if you meant this, maybe that's the part of the confusion, because it's not 4Q. Anyway, so we've got this formula. The equation above models the number of members, M, of a gym T years after the gym opens. Of the following, which equation models the number of members of the gym Q quarter years after the gym opens? So the key here is, we're not going to go through the choices, but the gist of the choices are the only really, well, yeah, because I don't have the full choices on this. So here's basically the deal. The question, the answer that you're going to have is going to maintain the same rate, the same annual rate of 2% in the parenthesis. And we want to know how can we change that to reflect Q. So basically what we want to have here is just make a substitution to relate T to Q. T is the number of years. Q is the number of quarters. So what relates these two? Well, there are 4 quarters in a year. So if I had, for example, 1 year, I'd have 4 quarters. If I had 2 years, I'd have 8 quarters. If I had 3 years, I'd have 12 quarters. So what is the equation that relates these? We can see it's going to be 4 times T is equal to Q. And this makes sense because if you have a certain number of years T, multiply that by 4, that's how many quarters you have. And so once I have this, this is going to become T is Q over 4, and I'm going to substitute that in. And notice this is just the same equation as it was. I've just swapped in Q over 4 for T. It's going to be the same effect. It's not going to make any difference whether it's T or Q over 4. You're just putting in a different input number. Everything else stays the same. So it's about finding this relationship and then using that to substitute. You'll see for this particular question, the other choices either mess with this percent, which is not really going to be appropriate, or give you other things like Q in the exponent or 4Q, and none of that can really work. So it's going to be Q over 4. Okay, typo, yeah. So probably, yeah, 4T. So that's why it's 4T, because there are 4 quarters in a year. So the number of years you have, you multiply that by 4 to get Q. A lot of people will put 4Q equals T for this, thinking like, oh, it's 4 times as many quarters as years, so I do 4Q equals T. But this gets it backwards, because here you actually would get something that doesn't make sense. Like if I plugged in 4 quarters, 4 times 4 is 16. That's saying that there's 4 quarters in 16 years. That doesn't make any sense. So this doesn't make sense. This makes sense, and we use that to make the substitution. We're going to continue this until 12 o'clock at the latest. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to send them. If not, we will end a little bit early. All right. Okay, so we got a hard math question. This comes from SAT Practice Test 2. If you haven't done this one, I recommend not watching this or, doing something else. So the figure above shows a regular hexagon with sides of length A and a square with sides of length A. Area of the hexagon is this. What is the area of the square? So to get the area of the square, I basically need to find what A equals, because all of these segments, A, these are all A. And so if I find what the value of A is, I just do A squared, and I'll get the area of the square. So really, I need to find a side length here. And the first thing to note is that I can divide this into triangles, because I don't know any formulas. Maybe there is one that exists that converts the side of a hexagon to its area. Probably exists. I don't know it. And you definitely don't need to know it. So I'm going to divide this into triangles. And the reason I'm going to do that is I noticed something pretty quickly. In this central angle, this is 360 degrees around these angles. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. So we'll look at this triangle here. This angle is going to be 60. And since this side equals this side, this is an isosceles triangle. Well, at least it seems to be at first. which means these two side angles must be 60 because the 120 degrees left for this triangle must be divided into 2. So I actually end up getting an equilateral triangle, which I'm going to extract out of here. And when I drop a perpendicular, it actually makes a 30, 60, 90. I know that this thing is going to be, this whole thing is A. So this is A over 2. And now what I can do is I can find the other sides using my 30, 60, 90 triangle. And you might remember, based on the 30, 60, 90 triangle, which they have at the front of the test, this is going to end up being A squared of 3 times 2. And when I multiply these together and divide by 2, times a half, this is going to be the area of one of these triangles. And then I know I've got 6 of these triangles in my hexagon. So if I multiply this by 6, 6 times a half times A radical 3 over 2 times A over 2. This has got to equal the area of my hexagon because I've just added up the areas of these 6 triangles. So 3 times, I'll combine this, A squared radical 3 over 4 is equal to 384 radical 3. Cancel out the radical 3, do a little bit of math here. So it's going to be 384 divided by 3 times 4, square rooted. I'll just make sure I didn't lose track of my thing here. So 384 divided, times 4 divided by 3. And I'm going to get that's square rooted. Okay, so basically you're going to end up getting, I believe the answer ends up being 256. I'll have to go back and check my math because I believe I must have missed a half somewhere. Oh, this is 8. This is 8. That's why. Oh, no, that's 3. In any event, yeah. Point is, you're going to do this process. You're going to get A. Once you get A, I believe it ends up being, I don't know the answer to this one. Is it A? I think it's A, right? This comes from test 2. Let me just get the answer to this one quickly. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what the problem is. The area is going to be just this is over A. Anyway, we do all this. We're going to actually put this over 2. And we're going to end up with A is the square root of 256. And then, as we said, we square the square, we square the A, and that'll get us the area of the square is 256. So this is a very difficult question, combines a lot of geometry stuff, which is why, of course, it's number 30 in the calculator section. But yeah, combines 30, 60, 90 triangle, combines some angle stuff, isosceles triangles, areas, setting up equations. A lot going on with that one for sure. All right, let me catch up on chat here. So should you write in cursive in the essay? Yeah, as long as it's legible, as long as someone can read it. If someone can't read it, that certainly won't help because they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're going to be less likely to be generous. Taking the SAT and ACT for the first time this fall. I've also been to practice. What are suggestions to study? I would pick one and focus on it, though I guess... I don't know if you're a junior or a senior, but either way, I would pick one and focus on that. That would be the first thing. So pick either SAT or ACT. Focus primarily on that. You can take both, but I definitely recommend specializing. As to how to study for it, it's a very broad question. I mean, the whole set of my videos and courses and stuff cover that. So what I recommend really to answer this question in a way that I won't repeat what I've said elsewhere and bore everybody is go to my SAT, ACT study plan course. And it's free. and you can get the courses. The link is below, rprep.co/courses. You can also just go to reasonprep.com. That will tell you how to set up your study schedule, what to study, how often to study, what order to study things in, how to do practice tests properly, how much time to study each day, how many days per week. All those kind of typical questions are covered there. But yeah, definitely also pick one, because studying for both just doubles your work, and there's not as much synergy between the tests as we might like. They're pretty different. So definitely pick one, and then once you pick one, you can use that course to design your study plan. And then I've got a lot of other resources and materials from there that can, in addition, help. So motivational advice to keep practicing. Yeah, I agree. The SAT, ACT are pretty boring. I mean, nothing. I mean, I can, say the typical boilerplate stuff of, well, you're going to get into a good college and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's very effective. I mean, I would say this. I mean, this is more, I wouldn't say motivational, more just like kicking the pants type deal. If you want a top score, if you want a top 5% score, if you want a top 1% score, you have to act like a top 5% or top 1% student. If you study and do what everybody else does, you're going to get a score that everybody else gets, typically. Like, that's the reality. So part of it is, if you're putting in the time, the work, you are already above, 90% of students who take this test. If you don't put in the time and the work, you're going to be within that 90% of students, and you'll probably get a score within the 90% of students, right? So it's part of, like, if you want a top 1%, a top 5% score, you need to act like a top 1%, top 5% student, which means practicing consistently, doing all the things that I preach elsewhere. That's just the kind of the reality of it. That's one thing. Second thing, and this is more of just like a warning more than anything else, like studying for the SAT and ACT in the grand scheme of what you do in academics in the future and what you do when you get into careers is a very well-defined thing. Never again will you have a very limited set of topics, a test that's very repetitive, practice tests that are very similar like it, and so you know exactly what to study. Like, that doesn't happen anymore once you get outside of the SAT or ACT. So right now, you have to work out your study habits, your study skills, so that when the studying becomes harder or less obvious what you should do, you've got skills to fall back on. Because it's not going to get any more clear in future tests, courses you take, whether it's in college, graduate school, professional school, career, starting a business, whatever it is you end up doing, there will never be a roadmap as clear as it is, such as it is, for the SAT or ACT again. So right now is the time to build those skills. Like, you'll never get I'm not saying it's easy, but an easier situation to know what you should be doing again. So if you don't build up these skills now, it'll make it harder then. So those are the two things I think are somewhat worthy of me saying, because maybe you don't hear that very often. I can give you the typical, like, oh, go to college, blah, 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 but whatever. You know that. That's not anything new. But those two things, number one, that you want to act like a top 5% student, do the top 5% student habits, and it will never get as easy again in future things you do, so continue to build up your skills, and that will pay off down the line. Follow up on that hexagon problem. Part of it is practice, but it's also knowing. Let me just get the rest of this here. So back to that hexagon problem. I'll answer the second question first. Yeah, there might be a shortcut way if there's a formula. I don't know what it is. For like setting the side of the regular hexagon, given that what the area of a hexagon would be. I don't know what it is. It's probably, probably derive it from here. It's probably like, 3 halves, 3 squared to 3 over 2 a squared or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. But yeah, in theory, such a thing exists. You don't need to know it for the test. Getting to the question, the first question, any tips for getting to the method to solve like that? It comes from practice for sure, but it also comes from knowing what can they test on the SAT? What tools do you have at your disposal, especially when it comes to hexagons? Because if you look, okay, what do they test on hexagons? One thing would be the degree angles, the number of degrees in each of these regular angles, which is n minus 2 times 180 over n, where n is the number of sides. So in this case, n would be 6. That would tell you that the number of degrees in each of these angles, in this case, is 120, which then when you split it, we get 60 and 60 again. So it's consistent. So you know that, but that's it. So what else is there? Well, triangles. The circles aren't going to be relevant here. Rectangles, quadrilaterals, no. Triangles. So what do we know about triangles? We know trig. Well, I've got no right triangles here, so trig is out. Pythagorean theorem is out. What else do I know about triangles? Well, I know isosceles triangles, equilateral triangles. I know 30, 60, 90 triangles. And so we can get a right triangle out of this if we slice it up. So it's got to be that, right? So it's like a process of elimination of knowing, okay, what do they test? What tools do I have? What might apply here? What might not? And using that as a way to view the problem. It also is, as your question hinted, just experience, knowing a lot of times to tackle these questions, you want to slice up your figure into manageable pieces that you can deal with. Also, when you get a triangle, just experience, you can drop a perpendicular in an equilateral to create a 30, 60, 90. So yeah, a lot of it is experience, but also just knowing what's on the test. And that's why getting used to the topics on the SAT, knowing what they test, knowing what they don't test. Yeah, it's experience, but it's also knowing what they're going to test. How long should I study for the SAT? Is 1 hour, 2 hours enough? I assume you mean per day. And yes, per day, this is for most people going to be good enough. Outside of the days, that's really bad handwriting. Let me use my pen here and stop being lazy. So per day, yes, this is a good target for most students. Outside of the days where you do a full practice test, which would probably only be every 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, that would be good. That's a good number. All right, we're going to start wrapping up soon. I've got a few more questions that I'll get to, but then we're going to wrap up. Like I said, we'll have another live stream later, maybe next weekend. I don't know yet, but just pay attention to my YouTube channel and website and Facebook group and mailing list, and you will know when we're meeting. I'm taking SAT in October. What will be the time schedule? I don't really know exactly what you mean by that. I suppose you mean like when will the test start? How long will each piece take? I don't know the details of that. A lot of it will depend on the particular testing center or site you're doing, on the proctor, things like that. Typically, it's early in the morning. You will get a break in between the reading and the writing sections, I believe. Reading and writing, and then also, I believe, between the first and second math tests. I know there are breaks involved there. I don't recall exactly where they are. I know there's one after reading because the reading section is monstrous. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know. It just depends on the situation. Others who might have taken the test where you're taking it might be able to give you a better idea of what the time breakdown will be. Okay, a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up. For math, will there be a lot of questions dealing with parabolas? Assume you mean SAT math. This is also true of ACT math. And the answer is yes, absolutely. So you want to learn parabolas, quadratics, quadratic equation, quadratic formula, vertex form, all that stuff. Very important for both tests. So yeah, absolutely. All right, so I got some other questions, but I'll have to just leave them until next time, or I'll follow up with you individually. One less follow-up question, and then we'll wrap up. I mean, how many hours until how many days? Do you mean till the test? I still don't know what you mean. If you're asking like how much you should study, again, that's covered in the study plan course. Otherwise, if you want to know how many days it is until the test, I don't know, calendar, I guess. But yeah, I still don't really know. So if you want to follow up by email, I might be able to help more with that. All right, so that's it for today's session. Again, we're going to have a live stream sometime, probably next week, either during the week or weekend. So stay tuned to my YouTube channel, website, Facebook group, mailing list, etc. if you're interested in that. Oh, how to study? Yeah, how to study. Go to my study plan course. It lays it out in detail. So yeah, let me know if you have any other questions. Feel free to reach out to me. Check out my website. Check out my courses. Link below, rprep.co/courses. You can learn more about all the things I offer, free courses and paid courses for both the SAT and ACT. I also offer tutoring and extra help services and things like that. So feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. All right, have a good one, everyone. Have a good weekend. For you Americans out there, have a good 4th of July, and I'll talk to you all soon.